Less than 24 hours, Georgians will be under a shelter-in-place order.
McDonald, though, said he did not know the man was handcuffed and was trying to use his foot to pin him to the ground so he could be handcuffed.
If your friends, neighbors, or local organizations are not complying, report them to us.
Howdy, y'all, and welcome to the Free Georgia podcast. My name is Jake Green. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to get right to it. First of all, if you have any questions about today's podcast, if you want to know anything about Libertarian Party of Georgia, if you find anything interesting, entertaining, if you want to help out, if you want to join LP Georgia or just the Libertarian Party, please go to lpgeorgia.com or I believe it's lp.org for the national. But today we're going to jump right in. We have our first ever presidential candidate on the Free Georgia podcast, Mr. Mike Ter Maat. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Jake. It's a real pleasure to be with you. You look like you're having a good summer there. I hope the rest of your Georgian community as well.
Well, this summer I'm in Montana, so I can't say much for my Georgian brethren.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is outstanding. Well, have a good time.
I will. Mike, I like to kind of treat people like they have no idea who you are. At least to start out.
Well, some of your viewers, for some of them, it may be true, and for others, they may know more than they wish they did already, right?
Exactly. Well, can you tell us like how it is you became part of the Libertarian Party and why you're running for president?
You bet. Those are two fairly different questions, so we better take one at a time.
There.
I became a libertarian coming from what I would characterize the right-hand side. I grew up as a Republican. I was in banking, and then I became an economist. I went to grad school at a very free market-oriented program at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., after working for a couple of different banks. Which came after business school, which came after engineering school. So I got lucky in the sense that the program that I sought out did fill my expectations and hopes for a very free market oriented program. It was in Washington, which is where I wanted to be as a young 28, 29-year-old conservative, fiscally conservative economist. I figured, you know, you want to make the world a better place, you go to Washington, spread a little fiscal conservatism. Washington being the seat of all power, that should work out. We should be able to make Washington work better, and the United States economy would work better, and beer would taste better, and everything, you know, colors would be brighter, and everything is going to work out just swell. And of course, that's not what happens, is it? You know, anyone who spent any time in Washington knows it's a very frustrating experience, best intentions notwithstanding. I had a good experience. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question. Yeah, what kind of like frustrations, like what's the atmosphere as far as like living there full time?
Being in the swamp, actually swimming in the swamp instead of just observing it. It is an interesting place. Everything is about relationships. It's not really about trying to make the world a better place. And I should hasten to add that there are many, many, many individuals who are well-meaning, who really do want to do right by the American people, as misguided as so many of them may appear to be from our perspective. Certainly, it is true that the bureaucracy of the federal government of the United States is largely left-wing leaning. They are mostly Democrats, whether registered as such or not. They do believe in statism. They do believe in expanding the size and scope of the government. And of course, that dovetails with a lot of their personal interests. You know, many of them become employees of the state because they believe in the project that the state government represents. And by that, I mean the federal government. So that's not a complete coincidence, but it is frustrating. I was a civil servant myself. I worked in the White House for a couple of years in the Office of Management and Budget. under the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. That's going back some time, right? 90, 91, 92 in there. And this was a guy who, I thought was a Republican. I thought he was fiscally conservative. I bought it hook, line, and sinker when he said, read my lips, no new taxes, right? And when he went back on that, it hurt a little bit. When it's inside of what you consider the family, it stings a little more, right? It's not just some fool outside of the circle of trust.
Right.
You don't expect that from someone who you kind of thought was a leader in terms of at least fiscal conservatism. And that was, I think, the beginning of an awakening for me that truly politicians are in it for the expansion of their own power, not necessarily to pursue any particular agenda. I truly believe that for the most part, maybe 100%, politicians are not leaders. Politicians are followers. And when you see that in action, it can be uncomfortable, but it does fit with that model more than it fits with the idea that politicians are actually leaders. It's rare that a politician will champion an idea. Typically speaking, politicians follow where it is that they believe that the people who can vote them into power, in the case of a democracy, where their heads are going. So I spent the 90s trying to figure that out. I became a free market advocate in the banking industry for many, many years. I then, with a buddy of mine, launched our own business. We were in strategic consulting and the education of the banking and financial services community. Did that for quite a few years. And then as a second career, now we're up to 2010, as a second career, I went to work as a police officer. I was in the academy in 2010. I turned 49 in the academy. I worked as a cop for 11 and a half years in Broward County, Florida, until about a year and a half ago or so, almost 2 years ago now. And that was a very interesting experience. I registered as a libertarian. I joined the party at around the time I became a police officer, around 2010. I had been accused of being a libertarian back in the 90s. I
love that that's an accusation.
Well, it's funny. A good Republican buddy of mine, Russ, who maybe is watching, told me in the late 90s, he says, "You're a libertarian." And I remember saying, I'll get the quote wrong, but in effect, what I said to him was, I don't say mean things to you. Why would you say such a horrible thing to me? Right. He introduced me to the idea that I was a libertarian. He had always felt like he was a libertarian. He remains a registered Republican, but I made the switch. And it wasn't until the 2000s, I would say, that I came to a real earnest appreciation of what I would call the left-hand side of libertarianism, coming to it from the left. Maybe you call it the blue side. I don't think I would call it blue because I don't think it identifies with the Democratic Party. But what I would call the ethical side, the side that says the government's role is merely to protect your individual rights and liberties, irrespective of whether that is the efficient way to run an economy. In other words, the right-hand side says, let people make decisions for themselves. That's the best way that the world works, right? Mm-hmm. I would call the other side of it, even if it didn't, even if it weren't the way to make the world work best, it's still not ethical for the government to assume to itself control over making decisions for us. Even if our decisions sucked and it was true that the government, this is a weird thing to say, even if all of our decisions sucked and the government really was smarter than us, try to wrap your brain around that, right? Even if the government were smarter than all of us collectively, and Mises was wrong, and we would be better off to cede all authority to the government. Even if that were true, it would still not be an ethical thing to do. We still have free will and deserve the right to make our own decisions for ourselves.
Yeah, that's such a hard point to communicate to people sometimes. I think that's one of the hardest sticking points for people, especially coming from the left, is like, even if a person is making horrid personal decisions, you have to let them do it, because to force them to do it would be an immoral thing.
I agree wholeheartedly. As a matter of fact, I like the way you said it. One of my favorite examples that makes my Democratic friends' heads explode is, you might enjoy this one. Imagine that there were a vaccine that's perfect, right? There are zero side effects. It saves your life 100% of the time. And if you don't have it, you're going to die. Okay? It's a perfect vaccine and perfectly necessary. Would the government have the right to require you to take it? And the answer's got to be no.
Yeah.
Every time. That our argument cannot be based on science, right? Indeed, it kind of it bothers me slightly when we argue the science, because I don't think it should matter. The science matters, right? Vaccines matter. How well they work matters.
Right.
And by the way, how the government interacts with big pharma to produce vaccines matters to the efficacy and especially to the distribution of information. All of that does matter. But whether the vaccine works well or not cannot be the turning point on which we decide whether it's okay to mandate people to take a vaccine. So I enjoy that example, but it does make some people explode inside of their heads.
Yeah, it is a good example, and I think you brought something like that up on Liberty Libations a few weeks ago, and yeah, it's like I said, it's difficult for people to make that jump, and it's hard for people to not want to tell people what to do a lot of the times. Like, everybody thinks that the way they're living is correct, and what they think is the right way to think a lot of the times. And
right,
what you can't do is base your decision making solely on circumstances. Like, if you're, especially when it comes to a political party, it has to be on principles, and it has to be on principles that will last forever.
That is very, very well said, and so important. And of course, in complete contrast to how any of us might feel viscerally at the moment, right? I mean, we all think we're pretty smart. I mean, I have my days when I pretty much prove I'm not, right? But we all have moments when we think we're pretty smart. And wouldn't the world be better off if everyone would just do what I tell them to do? I tell my kids that all the time, right?
Yes.
And of course, it's one thing in your household, but now that my children are grown up, my children are, 28 and 30. So now it's just a running joke for me to say it, of course.
Of course.
But right. Even if you do mean it, I mean, it's funny at the same time that you can mean it. I mean, I'm not averse to people giving advice earnestly, right? And you should seek advice from people whom you trust. I used to say, in the middle of the vaccine mandate arguments, in the middle of the COVID crisis, and for some people it was a crisis, so I shouldn't have done that. That's not fair. But in the middle of the mismanagement by our government, let's put it that way, I often said the reason the mandates bother me so much is because it presupposes to the government a certain intelligence that I delegate only to my wife. I do what she tells me to do, right? If she tells me to get a vaccine, I'll get a vaccine. If she tells me to take the garbage out, I'll take the garbage out. Probably if she told me to run over my foot with a truck, I would do that, which is kind of scary. But for the government to say, this is what you ought to do, just naturally, that I think that should concern, no matter what. I mean, if the government said, you should wear clothes outdoors in the wintertime. I mean, don't you immediately want to take your jacket off? I mean, that
100%.
That should be your reaction. No, it should be, because the government's got no business telling you that. And of course, notwithstanding the fact that there are so many people in the government that do mean well and that are smart and do have good data and probably do have good advice. I mean, all of that can be true, but people in the government have proven over and over again so frequently that they are not to be trusted, either because of their hubris, either because they think that they're smarter than even that they are. That happens all the time. Or because they are not acting in our interests and they choose to operate in the shadows and to hide their actual motivations, whether it's blowing up a pipeline at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, which I think is awfully weird, or contributing money to the development of a virus at a laboratory in Wuhan, China. And now they don't want you to know all about that. And they didn't want you to know anything about that 2 years ago, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they kind of just wait for it to pass, and then when truth comes out, no one cares anymore. Or the people who do care don't have any power to do anything about it.
And that's why people like you and I wind up frustrated.
Yep.
We wind up frustrated and worried. Would you agree with me that the big story from COVID, well, COVID itself was a huge story, so I don't want to downplay that. But one of the big lessons is the implications for the future. That is not the last time we will face crises, real or imagined, exaggerated or downplayed. We will face crises in the future. And I fear that many in the government have learned how much they can get away with.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that we have learned how difficult it is to stand up to the government. And I really fear the extent to which some people look at that whole episode and take the wrong lesson. I fear a certain number of Americans, I don't know what proportion this is. I don't have data to back this up. I'd be curious on your opinion on this. How many Americans look back at the COVID saga and say, thank God for Anthony Fauci. Thank God for the advice they gave us. Thank God for them telling me what to do, shutting our economy, keeping the schools closed. Thank God for all of that. I wonder how awful it would have been had the government not done that.
Yeah.
And the next time we have a crisis, goodness sake, I'm going to trust them even more. I worry about that.
Yeah, I definitely don't have numbers on anything like that or polling, but educated guess 30-35% would.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. And that is frightening, considering we live in, well, not really a democracy, but what some people consider a democracy these days.
It's democracy-ish. It's democratic-ish.
Exactly.
And Jake, you and I both know that even when democracy works well, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even when it works well, even if the institutions themselves were populated by people who were not trying to stab you in the neck, even if they worked as well as you want them to, you still run the risk that majorities are going to abuse their authority and shove rules down the throats of those in the
100%.
minority
100%.
opinion. So I don't even know what it is we're shooting for at this point. I'm pretty sure, I'm convinced that while democracy is imperfect and from time to time sucks, I'm pretty sure that whatever is in second place is a distant second. I'm fully committed to trying to make democracy work better. I'm not trying to overthrow it with the idea that I figured out a better way. But if you have, please memo me. You have my email address. If you're sitting on the big solution, don't hold back, buddy.
Yeah, you heard it, y'all. We'll blast Mike's email address out so you can send him all your crazy ideas for how government should be run.
My email address is on the website. You can go to MikeTerMaat.com and find the real email address and reach out to me with whatever crazy ass idea you have. It won't be any crazier than what, my campaign team and I sit around and shoot from the hip about. on a weekly or certainly a monthly basis. I mean, everyone comes up with crazy ideas because we're all frustrated, right? If you're not frustrated, then you really need to email me. Like, we really need, if you think your government is going in the right direction, we need to talk. My phone number is on there too. Text me, I will call you back. We need to spend some minutes together if you think things are going in the right direction.
I love that. Utterly reachable you are. That's amazing.
Well, it would be great if people were contacting me every few minutes, but it's merely every day, which is wonderful. People do reach out. It is virtually every day, and it's nice. I mean, you learn. First of all, you do get some good ideas. First of all, you do get some good ideas, both substantively and communications wise. But the most important thing is you learn that you're not alone, that people really do worry about the same shit that you worry, that I worry about, that you worry about, which is awkwardly a good feeling. I mean, it should not make us feel good that we're all sitting around commiserating and frustrated, right? But at least we know that there are like-minded people worth fighting with.
Yes.
Not just for. I think that we fight for all of Americans, people who are the least able to stand up to our authoritarian government, people who are least aware. And the fact that they're not aware, or the fact that they cannot stand up to the government, means that we have to fight for them. People whom we call brothers and sisters for no other reason than the fact that they're Americans, right? These are the people for whom we fight. But it's nice to know that there are people with whom we can fight as well. And we damned well better, because if you're waiting for a Republican or a Democrat to stand up for your rights, you're waiting for something that, in my view, is just virtually never going to happen.
Yeah, it can be a pretty lonely road being a libertarian, because they're few and far between at this point. And it's not like, we were talking about this on Liberty Libations this past week, how one of our guys was at Pork Fest, and how it was just, it's like those kind of events like that and the Great Create are like a real boost to morale and kind of push you to keep going down the road that you're going down, even though it would be not easy to exit, but at least easy to just stop walking.
I agree wholeheartedly. Both those events are great examples. I was happy to participate in each one of them. Just got back from Pork Fest. Nice. And as you know, I really enjoyed seeing everybody at the Great Create.
How was Pork Fest?
Very important event. Pork Fest is a good event. There are a lot of people worth talking to, especially those whom you hadn't realized before are full of good ideas. People that you don't know, right? People whose names you don't recognize, but people who want to chat. It's a very creative experience in that sense. And I was surprised and pleased by the extent to which it was outside of the Libertarian Party. There are plenty of people there that are not registered as libertarians. A lot of people not registered as Republicans or Democrats either. A lot of independents.
Do people think that there's going to be pork sold there? Is that why they show up?
Well, I think that they're libertarians with a lowercase L. Okay, they're just not all registered with the party. And Jake, I believe that most Americans have a partial libertarian streak. I think most Americans recognize, and this is our opportunity as a party. I think most Americans recognize that our government's going the wrong direction. I think most Americans are starting to recognize that a lot of our biggest problems are the result of bad public policy. I think most Americans are beginning to realize our government is not to be trusted, that politicians do things to aggrandize their own power and prestige and self-sense of worth and value, to expand their own government, their own control, their own power. And they don't always do it in your interests, notwithstanding what they say. I think that is something that we can tap into if we do it right, that we have not been able to successfully tap into in the past. And you had asked a question earlier that I neglected to answer. you had asked why I'm in this thing. And
I was
that's
about to
the
ask
answer.
again.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, and that's the answer, because we have a big opportunity, but we have to do it right. And I believe that right way of doing it, the successful, the winning way, is to lead with a very policy forward campaign. The campaign that we have put together is based on a platform that we call the Gold New Deal, goldnewdeal.org for those in your audience that are curious. It's our commitment to the most transformative ideas by branding it and giving its own URL, right? What we're saying is we can't back up on this. We are committed to the most transformational ideas, even on the other side of the nomination. And I believe that is the way to differentiate us from the Republicans and from the Democrats. I believe that's absolutely critical as a strategic matter. And for this reason, I am committed to the idea that the right strategy for both getting attention, getting votes, and for spreading our message in the most libertarian, the most principled way possible is the same thing. It is being loud, being completely differentiated, leading with policy, not backing down, being completely principled. Remember that we're not shooting for 80% here, right? We're shooting for 30%.
Right.
37% wins in a three-way race. Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, you could win with 34%, but 37 virtually assures victory. That's what you're shooting. That's a home run. So this idea that we need to water down or dumb down or get rid of our principles to compromise, I don't believe is the right strategy for getting votes, much less for spreading our message. I think that's very important. So that's a big reason that we're in it, to spread that strategy, to push that strategy, to force the party to go in that direction. And the other reason is that I believe that we can demonstrate that the right kind of campaign is one full of credibility, that you have to back up those very transformational ideas. You can't just throw them out. You can't just stand on the balcony and scream, "End the Fed." You got to be able to back it up. You got to have, plans. You have to have a background in public service and public policy to be able to back that up, as I do and as our team does. We have a very professional team already on board. We have 13 professionals. We have another dozen unpaid advisors on our advisory team. So we have a big group and growing that's ready to go. We're very excited about getting to the other side of the nomination and absolutely letting loose. So this is the way we believe that you have to build a campaign. You have to be ready early, and you have to be policy forward, and you have to speak with credibility.
I like that. So as you know, last year, the Libertarian Party kind of had a change in management, kind of had a switch in direction. A lot of people had been pretty upset with how things had been run and what things like what campaigns had looked like, especially presidential campaigns.
Me too.
How, okay, perfect. How would I mean, you mentioned kind of what the campaign would be about, but how would it differentiate from what's been happening in the past, and how would you get more attention on it than what we've gotten?
I'm glad you connected those dots, because I believe that is the correct analysis. The reason that we had a changeover was because of a movement that really grew out of disappointment with past national campaigns. If those campaigns, 2012, 2016, 2020, if those campaigns are managed differently, I don't think the movement gains the kind of growth pattern that it did. I think that those campaigns are what really showed that we need to correct course. And I don't mean that to sound personal. The people that ran those campaigns were smart, well-meaning, doing the best job they could, trying something. It just proved not to work, either in a strategic sense as far as gaining votes, nor in terms of spreading our message. For example, if you're out there saying, I'm fiscally conservative like a Republican and socially liberal like a Democrat, I would prefer you would stay home. I don't think that is strategically a smart way to go, in the sense that you haven't defined yourself in your own context. You've defined yourself in the context of your competition. You have not given people a reason to hang on to you. You've not given people a reason to be excited about your campaign. You haven't told us, what's the why? What do you stand for? And this is absolutely, by the way, you haven't even told people something that's true, where you've lied to them. We are not fiscally conservative like Republicans. Republicans haven't been fiscally conservative since, I'm going to go with the 80s, although I can make an argument that they weren't very fiscally conservative in the 80s. Democrats are not socially liberal. They have not been socially liberal for, I'm going to go with at least 15 years. This whole idea of beating each other into agreeing with some stated platform, that's not the way libertarians behave or think, and that's not the way that we should. Look, the libertarian way is that we all disagree, we fight, we punch each other in the face, and then we go have beers, right? Yeah. That is the way we do things, and it's not the way the Democratic Party does things. If you disagree with the Democratic Party's platform, they'll throw your ass out. They will cancel each other. That is some weird stuff there. So anyway, having said all that, the reason it's so important is both because we need to spread a real principled message, but also strategically speaking, as far as gaining votes, getting media attention, convincing donors to come over, all of these ways of earning support, you're not doing it if that's your mojo. If you're saying, I'm kind of like that party and I'm kind of like this party, it doesn't work. I would argue that the reason Gary Johnson's campaign imploded in 2016 was not because he forgot the name of a town in Syria. It was because when he did forget the name of a town in Syria, when he did make that mistake, as politicians do, right? Politicians make mistakes.
100%.
I wish that weren't true, but politicians are humans, and humans make mistakes, and politicians are as bad as any. So they're going to make mistakes. The problem is that when he made that mistake, he had not given people a reason to hang on to him. And it proved that his support, which had made it to double digits in the polls, think about that. What an opportunity squandered. When he made it to double digits in the polls, it proved to be built on sand. It just completely slid out from under his feet because people had not been given a reason to hang on to him. Contrast that with Donald Trump. Say what you will about the Donald, and I've got no patience for the guy, and I suspect that no one in your audience does either, right? Indeed, I was in New York in the 80s, so I got all kinds of reasons to dislike the guy and plenty of history to look back on. I have no patience for him whatsoever. But you have to admit that when he said, basically, I could probably go out into Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and not lose a lot of support. You have to admit that he might not be completely wrong, right? Indeed, he's been indicted a couple of times now, with a couple of more coming, and his popularity continues to go up. People know why they dislike him. People know why they like him. They're going to hang on to him. I'm not suggesting that we run a Trumpian campaign, that we run around insulting people and act stupid, act like a populist, and give up on our libertarian principles. That would be a bad idea. But what I am suggesting is that you need to convey to people what it is that you stand for. If I'm right that most Americans have a libertarian streak, they will rally around you. They will find you. They will find your flag if you put it in the ground and you raise it high enough. so that they can see it. They will rally around these ideas, but you have to be absolutely clear on what it is that you represent and give people a reason to hang on to those, so that when certain things happen, they don't just all disappear. And I think that that's why the Gary Johnson campaign imploded in 2016.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of showed how much power the TV media had back then. Because if you asked 99% of citizens of the United States what Aleppo was, they couldn't tell you what or where it was. They wouldn't even know it was a city. And so, like,
agreed.
The media spun it to where, and it was also, I mean, it was just a setup.
And the media told you this was important and that he was an idiot.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what happened, which actually leads me to my next question, which is RFK Jr. has been getting tons of interviews and seems to be running a campaign that is completely different than either of the mainstream parties have run in the past.
Yeah.
He seems to be going on taking advantage of the podcast scene. That seems to be like his thing now.
His shtick. Well, I think that that's smart. I mean, I do that too. You know, I average more than a podcast a day. Nice. I think that is the way to go. Both for the reason that you pointed out, that the mainstream media is mainstream, right? Anything that runs across the mainstream, what was formerly the mainstream beliefs, they're just not having it. They'll run you down in front of your face as well as behind your back, but also because they're just becoming less important. You know, the way to get more attention is to do the podcast thing. It's bits and pieces and chunks here and there. You know, you can't just make nice with 3 networks and think your job is done. That does sound fun and easy, but that's not how the way the world works anymore. And it shouldn't. It never should have worked that way. Remember that if you go earlier than the television age, if you go back to the newspaper age, it was in bits and pieces. You had to make nice with 1,000 newspapers. You couldn't just make nice with 3 television networks. It's weird. And I do believe that even 25 years from now, we'll look back on the television age and say that was weird. That was weird. And we're better off having outlived that. And that's not to say that cable stations don't have their influence and are not important, because, as you know, several programs remain somewhat important, diminishingly so. I heard that CNN screwed up so bad over the past 2 months that they're probably up for sale. That's a weird story too, right?
Right.
That's a weird story. So, you know, whatever. So I like RFK's strategy. By the way, I like his disruptiveness generally. You know, the reason he's done so well in the polls is because nobody wants to take on the president of the United States, which is a really sad commentary on the power of the incumbency. If you fear taking on Joe Biden, there is something wrong in this world, right?
Right.
In what world is that guy intimidating? That is just a matter of the incumbency, and I get it. I'm not saying that they're being stupid. I do understand that so many people are all in on just maintaining the Joe Biden administration. I fear for their strategy that they will be proven wrong in relatively short order. It's not clear that he's healthy enough even to make it to election day, much less 4 years beyond that. So we may have some more candidates coming in. But I do like RFK's disruptiveness. I wish he were more libertarian. He's not. He's a statist. I get that. He's a bit of a populist. He's a good government type. You know, he's pissed. He wants reform. Good for him. But the reason he wants it is because he wants government to work better. You know, he's not saying less regulation. He's saying better regulation. And on some level, you got to respect that. I mean, as Democrats go, good for him, right? But I think that most Americans will come to understand the difference.
I completely agree. Yeah, he is definitely making waves, and it's interesting, you know, the idea of him not getting any debates, and not obviously, I mean, he's likely not going to get the Democratic nomination. So there's word of him maybe running as an independent. So what would you think of having like two major parties, then the Libertarian Party and an independent, and then all the other parties behind? Like, does that make things
Maybe it
easier
helps
or
us.
harder?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. You know, the knee-jerk reaction is that it makes it harder because he might suck up some of the enthusiasm that is the anti-duopoly enthusiasm. But he's not that different from the Democratic Party that he's going to suck up all of it. And it might loosen things up. You know, it might shake some commitments off the tree from the mainstream media, that they would be forced to have a look at something besides the duopoly, so that there are necessarily some pluses and some minuses. The one thing I would remind everyone is that something weird is going to happen. We just don't know which weird thing. If you think about, you know, because everyone says, oh, you know, you don't have a chance, or this isn't going to happen, or that's not going to happen. I'm sorry, it's all bullshit. Something weird is going to happen. Either Joe Biden is going to be elected president of the United States at his age with his relative, and I don't mean this to sound personal, his relative feeble-mindedness. That would be weird. I mean, here's a guy who has not had principles his whole life, who was, to be fair, not the sharpest knife in the drawer when he was 39. For that guy to be reelected would be weird.
Yeah. For
Donald Trump to be reelected, that would be weird too. I mean, here's a guy about whom, and this can be said for Joe Biden as well, most of the people in their respective parties prefer that someone else be the nominee. That's a weird thing. Now, Donald Trump is clearly number one with more than half of the support, but generic polls say if you had a choice between being represented by someone else who is Mr. Wonderful or Donald Trump, you'd pick someone else who's Mr. Wonderful. And the same thing in the Democratic Party. And Donald Trump is weird. He's a weird character. He's obviously an unethical character. He's a populist. He also is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. For that guy, under indictment, crimes committed. Some are, you know, some of these allegations I think are stupid. They're obviously politically motivated. I'll give him that.
All right.
But to be honest, this alleged sexual assault in the department store that the civil trial found him liable for, I thought that was, personally, this is just me speaking, personally, I found that disturbing. I thought that was kind of a big deal, particularly in this day and age. I've got an ethical problem with that, right? You know, you taking documents home and you make sure that no one else sees them. You know, I could go this way on that kind of crap. But the sexual assault thing, I find that fundamentally, on a very fundamental ethical level, to be very, very disturbing. If that guy is elected, that's a weird thing. Okay, so something, or an independent, or I will be elected. Those are four weird things, right?
Yeah.
Those are four weird things. But something weird is going to happen.
I like that.
Something weird is going to happen. We don't know which weird thing, but the idea of, well, you know, weird things don't happen. It'll turn out like it. No. That is no longer an argument. Something odd is going to happen. We just don't know. We just don't know which one.
I like that a lot. I mean, being libertarian, we're just naturally weird, so that kind of jives with our whole vibe. So,
hey, we're the king of weird things happening.
That's perfect. Before we get out of here, I want to know top 3 things that you would do on the campaign trail, and then top 3 things that you'd want to begin immediately upon gaining the presidency.
That's a great pair of questions. Can I go backwards? Top 3 things you want to do when you're in office. You want to deep six executive orders. So the day after the election, you're putting a couple of young attorneys in charge of reviewing every executive order with the idea of reversing each and every single one of those, and sending the signal to the Hill. Some of these are going to be delayed. We might not want to shut them down, January 21st. Some of these may require a year's heads up to the Hill that if you're in love with any of these, this is your 12-month warning. You better do something to save them because we're setting the timer, right? That's one thing you got to do. The other thing you got to do as soon as the election is over is recruit a lot of libertarian-minded individuals. They don't have to be registered libertarians. It would be great if they were. And you need several hundred of them. You'd prefer to have all 4,000. That's the number of appointments. But you need at least several hundred hardcore libertarians to run the agencies that you need to winnow down, that you need to shrink so that you can eventually move legislation to sunset them. I spend a lot of time talking about ending the Fed. I believe that we need to get rid of the IRS. Yes, to starve the federal government, but not merely for that reason, but because to the extent to which the federal government needs to raise money, it needs to go to the states to do so. States need to represent us. So that's just one example, but there are agencies that we need to get rid of, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And as anyone who spent as much time as I have in Washington knows that you can't get rid of even a function, much less an entire agency, unless you shrink it down to be as irrelevant as possible first. And that takes leadership inside of each one of those agencies to winnow them down, to shrink their budgets, to stop the block grants, for example, in the case of the Department of Transportation, Department of Education. You need to shut down a lot of crap so that a year or two, or unfortunately, possibly 3 years later, you can move legislation to get rid of those. So that's a bit of a project. And then in terms of foreign policy, which is an area where the president has a tremendous amount of discretion, we need to make a series of phone calls that first week to give people the heads up that we understand that we've made commitments, we have treaty obligations. And so there are certain things we can't shut down in a matter of hours. But this is your heads up. The United States foreign policy is no longer going to be centered on the idea that we believe that NATO is in our interest. We're going to start taking steps to get out of NATO. And that means that if you and your population, Mr. European leader, Madam European leader, if you and your nation remain paranoid of a Russian invasion, I would not recommend that, remaining paranoid of a Russian invasion. But you do you, right? If you truly believe that, then this is your 12 to 18 month heads up. It's time for you to start spending, 3.5% of your GDP on defense, because we're not going to be there to back you up. That's one example. As another example, we're going to be cutting a very clear edge regarding Taiwan. We are not going to be pursuing strategic ambiguity. We're going to let people know where we stand. And the first people that need to be told that are the investors in Taiwan. If you have built a chip plant in Taiwan based on the idea that the United States would always be there to bail you out, it's time to rethink. You might want to invest in Milwaukee, right? Can I
basically the same thing?
Can I interest you in Seattle? Because investing in Taiwan is not the same thing defense-wise. The United States does not believe that it is in its interest to go to war over Taiwan. And we will not be snookered into, we will not be intimidated by strategic supply lines into thinking otherwise. And the reason we got ourselves into this mashugana is because we were not clear with people from the get-go. And we let investors believe that it was a good idea to build these factories there because they would have U.S. protection. And that's a mistake that we made, and we need to start unwinding that. So that's a third thing that needs to be done right away. On the campaign trail, you asked.
Yes.
You have to buy advertising loud and early. If you have $600,000 in the bank, you're doing something wrong. That has to be spent loud and has to be spent early. You need to give notice that you're running a campaign based on transformational ideas, that you're differentiating completely from the Republicans and the Democrats, that this is a story that needs to be told. This is an underdog story with credibility. And I would, as a second thing, in addition to bold, loud, early advertising, I would pursue the strategy that you put your finger on of a tremendous number of podcasts, a great deal of expenditure. There is some pay to play. I recognize that. So you're going to have to potentially spend some money, but you need to participate with the online forums and not depend on the mainstream media, and leverage that against the mainstream media to take notice and to give us a look. I do believe that the credibility and professionalism of our campaign is going to earn a lot of look from a lot of media outlets, donors, voters, because remember, a lot of people still view the presidential race as a competition among individuals, not merely a competition among philosophies. So if they can't look at you and say, I could at least imagine that gal or that guy being qualified potentially to go all the way, they're not going to bother paying attention, right? So you need to hit hard the idea of having the background in public policy and public service that allows me to talk about ending the Fed, changing the way we budget, criminal justice reform, changing the way we manage police, changing the school system. So much of these things are outside the direct control of the presidency, but we need to talk about these things because we need to show leadership as a matter of principle, and people will recognize that they too have a libertarian streak, and that's how they will rally around you. So, you know, those are some of the things that need to be done, I believe, on the campaign trail as well.
I love it. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, man. This has been great.
Thank you. You've got
Absolutely.
a great show, and I'm just so pleased to have been able to be a part of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Where can people find you? What are your links, your handles, all that?
You want my physical address? You want people to drive up? I live in Virginia. They can.
I would prefer not.
Text me in advance so I can make sure that the beer is cold. Go to the website. Go to MikeTermaat.com. You'd have to spell it right, though. There's 2 A's in Termaat, right? MikeTermaat. MikeTermaat.com or goldnewdeal.org. Don't go to goldnewdeal.com. They'll try to sell you something, which is not a bad idea, but I'm okay with buying gold, but it's the wrong website. So go to goldnewdeal.org and read about our platform. Drop me a line. You know, if you want to volunteer for the campaign, we're building that out. We've got important projects that people are working on. In addition to the professional staff and the advisory board and that kind of thing, we can always use volunteers who feel like playing a role. And, you know, if anyone has a few dollars in their pocket that, you know, are really annoying them and they need to get rid of it, you can do that at the website as well. So none of this stuff comes free, right? It's all a bit of a lift, and so we welcome participation in any form.
You're darn right. Well, Mike, thanks again. And everybody out there, thank y'all for watching. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, go to lpgeorgia.com. You can also email me at podcast@lpgeorgia.com and go to Mike's website. Check out his stuff, goldnewdeal.org. Make sure to tune in every Thursday night for Liberty Libations, and once a week, new Free Georgia podcast. Until next time, thank y'all for watching. Peace.